Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for being with us today. I'm your moderator of today's webinar. My name is Nikos Zaharis. I'm the director of Southeast European Research Center, SEERC, based in Thessaloniki, Greece. And this is an acting project webinar with the title Bridging the Gap Inclusive Criteria for NGO Funding. We know that addressing the challenge of climate change requires significant societal transitions. And we know also that various public and private organizations are funding projects to support this green shift. And the role of civil society in supporting vulnerable populations and ensuring that the green transition won't exacerbate inequalities is a crucial one. Unfortunately, a lot of times funding calls do not adequately address the needs of vulnerable groups, potentially leaving them behind in these transitions. And exactly this is what we want to discuss today in today's meeting, in today's webinar. A few words about the project, the acting project. You can visit our website and see a lot of details there. It's a horizon-funded project that aims to understand the impact of Green Deal policies on vulnerable groups, prevent inequalities, and produce knowledge and innovations to advance behavioral change at individual and collective levels for a green European Green Deal that it is inclusive and promotes equality. Our objectives as a project is to impact Green Deal policy initiatives on vulnerable groups with a gender plus perspective, to mitigate the potential negative impacts of policies on inequalities, and to implement pilot actions in the policy domains of the Green Deal so that we can promote behavioral change. The purpose of the webinar is twofold. From an NGO perspective, is to explore strategies to effectively address the needs of vulnerable groups and increase their chances of securing funding. And from the funding organization's perspective, to discuss how funding bodies can incorporate inclusivity into their criteria and guidelines. Before we go into the actual part of the webinar and to our speakers, I want to say that the acting project has been working for over 3 years, I think now, in all these issues, addressing behavioral change, vulnerable groups, gender plus perspective, and so on. And we have produced a lot of results. You can read policy recommendations that are in our website, and we're going to produce more in the coming months. Some key points of these recommendations that I think are relevant to our discussion today. What we propose is that we should ensure inclusivity in research. Funding calls to prioritize projects that actively include vulnerable groups, addressing social and economic disparities in response to climate change. Adopt a gender plus approach, so include gender considerations together with other intersecting inequalities such as race, age, and disability, so that we ensure a more comprehensive, inclusive strategy. Engage local communities, involve local communities from the beginning, especially marginalized groups, in the decision-making process to ensure that their needs and knowledge are reflected in research outcomes. And promote behavioral change by encouraging projects that focus on fostering behavioral changes in marginalized groups so that they can enhance their engagement with sustainable practices. As I said, there are more policy recommendations, a lot of details you can read in our website, and I encourage you to go to the website and to join the active network, so you can get more news and more ideas coming out of the project addressed to you. I will put in the chat also where you can do that. And after this very short introduction, I'd like to go to the webinar. What we're going to do today, we have two distinguished speakers, and we thank them very much for being with us. Is Dr. Sotiris Petropoulos and Professor Andrei Holman. I will introduce them shortly. And this will be the core of the webinar. And after that, we'll have the chance to ask questions. So I will probably ask a couple of questions as moderator, and then we open the floor to the audience. You can ask questions either by writing them in the chat, addressing either to Dr. Petropoulos or to Professor Holman, or you can ask to have the floor and and ask the questions. So a brief introduction about our two speakers. Dr. Sotiris Petropoulos is an associate professor in the Department of Political Science and International Relations of the University of the Peloponnese. He focused, among others, on civil society, multiculturalism, and inclusiveness through civil society. He has a wide experience in funding schemes, including European Commission, charitable foundations, and corporate social responsibility. And he is the co-founder of HIGS, a Greek non-profit organization that acts as an incubator of civil society and NGO, and he has been advocating extensively for the enhancement of inclusive criteria on funding. This is our first speaker, and our second speaker is Professor Andrei Holman. He is a professor at the Faculty of Psychology and Education Sciences in Alexandru Ioan Cuza University of Iași, Romania. He has been principal investigator and project manager of several international and national research projects, some of which target vulnerabilities and inclusiveness. He published extensively on topics such as environmental psychology, personality, health psychology, moral judgments, cognitive processes, and drifting behaviors, and he participated as an evaluator in different types of research and development programs. So many thanks to both of you, Dr. Petropoulos and Professor Holman. A reminder that we need you to keep your microphones closed during the presentations of the two speakers. This presentation is being recorded, but it will be recorded only the part of the two presentations, the two speakers, not the discussion that we're going to have afterwards. And it will be available for you or for your colleagues in ACCTING website and various social media. So this is it from me. Let me stop sharing. I would like to thank again both our speakers and give the floor to Dr. Petropoulos. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, the organizers, as well as all of you that you're here today to discuss an issue that it is, may I say, very upbeat, very in fashion the last couple of months or years. I have a presentation, so let me just first of all share my screen. I will try to be quite brief and then allow for more time to discuss afterwards, potentially with some a Q&A, a short Q&A session. So the things that I'm going to talk to you about, they come from both my two hats. So in a more practical sense, through HIGS, we have been noticing changes or potential changes in the patterns of funding addressed to civil society organizations, while on the other hand, from my research/academic hat, we see also some changes within the European, at least, context that gradually we can also highlight spillover into the Greek ecosystem. Now, if somebody would like to find what I see as a very core proof of how issues related to social inclusiveness are being somehow included in the Green Deal environmental agenda, I would point out the 2015 Paris Declaration on the Environment, a very important declaration on how states globally should behave around meeting targets related to climate change and global warming. In that declaration, something that it is not, sometimes it is not very visible at first, in the preamble, you will see for the first time ever in an environment-related declaration, global declaration, a note that human rights must be all the times be supported and protected, even when we are talking about activities and actions around climate change. And it is celebrated as one of the wins of the cooperation between human rights groups and hence civil society organizations that deal with social issues, and on the other hand, environmental groups and relevant NGOs. They combine their forces and they push an agenda that brings into the environmental activities, pro-environmental activities, the notion of social justice, of human rights protection, of inclusiveness, of groups that are more vulnerable and need to be protected. Now, this has been also been gradually translated into funding, not in the level that one would think, because we are past 9 years, 10 years from 2015. Nevertheless, what we see is definitely more calls for proposals coming from both institutionalized funding sources, such as, for example, NSRF, the EU, as well as funding that comes from the private sector, let's say, for example, CSR programs of companies, as well as charitable foundations, where inclusiveness of vulnerable groups within the whatever mix of activities in being prepared and proposed is highly prioritized. We are not yet to the point that we see specific points, let's say, or evaluation add-ons being provided, but we know from a series of interviews and discussions with different funding institutions that they do take into consideration the role of the dimensions of inclusiveness and of protection of vulnerable groups when they discuss and they assess proposals that are around the environment, and vice versa. Now, what we definitely see in core documents, like, for example, in SEERC or Erasmus+, is that though the Green Deal and the green approaches, environmental approaches, is there, there is also a strong note on inclusiveness. And that this is quite, in a way, imperative nowadays to getting in a very competitive funding environment and funding channel, some extra points that you need in order to get the funding. Now, when we go to other funding channels, let's say, for example, corporate social responsibility schemes through companies, as well as charitable foundations, we see that green solutions are a top priority. This needs to be understood as a given. Now, though it is there, primarily or before the Green Deal and all this excitement over the environmental solutions, there was a trend into these types of funding schemes and channels to further support inclusiveness. So not forget, this is especially in Europe, as we had a very difficult period since the global financial crisis of 2007-2008, with the increase of social needs, a lot of people that were required to be protected and supported. Hence, we see, and this also came again during the COVID crisis, as well as the prior refugee crisis in Europe. So all these different crises or momentum or events have built up momentum into finding core funders being quite sensitive into a sweet spot between environmental activities on the one hand and activities that are around the protection of vulnerable groups. What I give you here is Philea. Philea is the #1 European organization bringing about most, if not all, charitable foundations across Europe. Had run in less than a year ago a survey on megatrends, on what in a decade or so we will be discussing in the philanthropy ecosystem. And the prioritization that you see is part of that survey. So climate and environmental degradation was put first, and then others were coming. And this means that a lot of, and there you can see it also in one of the graphs from that report, Though it is not highlighted as the first, the combination of top 1 or top 2, which are the green and the purple colors, environmental degradation was set as a core priority. And this definitely has been highlighted in funding schemes. So here you see, sorry, in order for you to be able to see the numbers, I put it upside down, but well, no, not upside down, but a bit on the side. But if you can see these different charts, these different bars represent, on the one hand, number of grants, and on the other hand, the second each year is the volume of funding addressing environmental needs. And you can see 1.6 billion euros with more than 8,500 grants being given around activities that are around environmental protection. So definitely we know that the environment is found at the top of the priority of a lot of charitable foundations and corporate foundations and companies. So definitely this is there. So now, why should somebody see the inclusiveness dimension within environmental activities and funding that should go to fight environmental degradation, etc.? We know that vulnerable groups are the ones that are mostly affected by climate change. So green solutions that somehow include them is a must and will become a must in the coming years. So think about, for example, there is a new trend of building up energy communities. These are different funding schemes, either being impact investment or being grants from charitable foundations, even EU funds, that they support into building up energy communities. So there are communities that they build up solar panels, and from there they get sustainable energy production. Now, a new trend into that is that part of what energy communities are doing is that part of the electricity that they produce in a sustainable way should be provided to poor people, to vulnerable communities, in order to support them and become part of of a solution to environmental issues. We see more and more street workers using electric cars in order to reach out to those in need. For example, we have seen more and more food social kitchens and activities and initiatives that they provide food to homeless people or people that they cannot feed themselves to change into vegan food. So they do not just provide food, there are new initiatives where it is vegan food that is produced, and partially this is actually supported by the fact that vegan food is pro-environmental, so we get a more interesting mix of doing good for both the environment as well as the vulnerable groups that we are supporting. Now, if I was to be asked what key steps some people should do, I have split that into what the funders would do, so the funder side, and then the civil society organization side. So from the funders part, we have seen that, but we need a further push on that, create calls of proposals that clearly promote projects that address green issues with an inclusiveness approach. So, for example, not just receive any proposal around the environment, but to include their vulnerable groups, maybe combat also gender issues, people with disabilities, and other different less privileged groups in our societies. Ask for projects that are in the very end environmentally friendly. So it goes also the other way around. If you want to receive proposals that are around protecting the vulnerable group, just ask for the way that this project is implemented to be as environmentally friendly as possible. And there we see that there are also, again, especially charitable foundations, that they want to see that. So use reusable I don't know, containers. Go to the beach when you do a cleanup of a beach, which is of environmental dimension. Also add there local people that they actually could use the beach and the specific area, and have a talk about how it is important to protect the beach and the environment, and include them in cleaning up the beach. Joint funding initiatives that we are seeing a lot across the EU. By the way, Philea has supported a new wave of sort of core statements, national statements of national associations of charitable foundations to be pro-environment and pro-inclusiveness. This type of combination. So there are a lot of initiatives where different funders can join forces in order to push an agenda that is both pro-environmental and pro-specific vulnerable groups, and cover their own contribution. This is also not a very strong trend, but we see some potential there. We have a lot of EU-funded projects. EU-funded projects, sometimes they have their own contribution part, so some percentage of the budget needs to be covered by the consortium that implements that project. And there are a lot of projects now that they are found in the intersection between combating climate change and dealing with vulnerability. So even in for example, AMIF, Asylum Migration Integration Fund calls, we have seen that, the last ones. So there is a 10, 20, 25% that needs to be covered. So other funding channels, such as charitable foundations, mostly, and partially also companies, could cover that 10, 15% that is needed in order for the whole amount of the project to be collected. Now, from the civil society organizations part, first of all, what is becoming a short trend, but I think it's going to grow more, is undergo an analysis on how to be more environmental friendly, because it doesn't mean that they really know. There are great people that they know, for example, how to offer social provision services, give blankets to the homeless, provide food or whatever, but maybe they don't think about environmental issues when they design their activities. Also check how the environment is affecting your beneficiaries, and there I think is a very great potential of value, because they are the ones, civil society organizations, let's say of social sector related or health sector related focus, they're the ones that they have almost daily communication with vulnerable groups. So they can be the ones that they record what we know from different surveys, that vulnerable groups are really affected by the changes in our environment. So they can get that, and they can use it as the base for a great proposal to reach out specific funders and get that funding. Well, on the same time, they can check how the beneficiaries themselves are affecting the environment. So we know that several vulnerable groups, they litter a lot. We know, for example, that a lot of communities around the Roma population are not very well trained, and they understand the effect of each even individual into the environment. So they can also research on that. Again, this is great material to create successful proposals for funding. While on the other hand, we've seen a new trend of a lot of civil society organizations setting up volunteering programs for either individuals or also employees of certain companies. So the X company would like to send for 1-2 days all their employees, or whoever they want from their employees, to do some voluntary work in the X organization. And there, again, it is important that a green aspect is included. And we have seen it, for example, in Greece, because Higgs is supporting such initiatives. We have seen that when the green aspect is included, it makes it more welcomed from the part of the company. And we see that a lot of the times it creates this new bond between the civil society organization with which the company collaborated for the volunteering program, and this continues into being grants, a funding relationship, not just I'm sending you my employees there. Finally, approach environmental groups to support you in creating new programs. We don't see a lot of collaboration in many segments of civil society organizations ecosystems throughout Europe, at least. But it's more easily when there is no the sectorial bias. So just imagine that it is much easier to ask for Greenpeace or let's say WWF or smaller environmental organizations to connect and to collaborate with organizations that they are not around the environment, but they are around a social issue, and vice versa. So there again, there is potential value that we can get if people interact and build bridges with each other. And finally, think of capacity building with a green hat. What I mean here is that we are seeing some funders being more and more keen into supporting capacity building funding to civil society organizations. So I'm not giving you to run a specific project. I'm giving you to support your organizational structure, your building, anything that will make you, will empower you to do great projects in the future. So think about, for example, that capacity building being included with green dimension. So yes, get me this new photocopy machine that I need, but let's that be AAA plus, A triple plus, how it is said. Or yes, it is great to set up a new CRM tool that will allow me to get more donations, individual donations, and do great work on the ground. But let's see how this CRM or any other digital I'm using is more environmental friendly than before. Digital waste, digital tools that they are using a lot of energy is also an upcoming trend that we will see in the coming years, we think. So think about things like that. I'm going to stop here. Many thanks for your attention. Happy to connect with you again through Q&A or a discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Petropoulos. I'm sure there are a lot of questions in people's minds, but please keep your questions after the second intervention from Professor Holman, and we can have a very good discussion. But thank you very much for this very insightful presentation. So now I pass the floor to Professor Holman for his own presentation, and then we have our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikos. Hello, everybody. My name is Andrei Holman. I also have a short PowerPoint. So let me just share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see my screen now. So my colleague, Professor Petropoulos, I believe, made a great overview of the core coordinates to keep in mind when preparing an NGO project on addressing this issue, both inclusiveness and, let's say, Green Deal related topics. My aim here is to give you a very subjective insight on my experience, and it's important to consider the fact that I don't work in an NGO. I work in a very specialized department of psychology in a faculty that also has a department addressing special needs. So that's a start to address. It has been a reason to address the needs of this type of population. And I have been in contact with many colleagues that have had projects addressing this type of population. people with disabilities and so on. And also my experience in collaborating across various projects addressing environmental issues, both the regular type of finance projects and also, let's say, more research-oriented projects. And as I told you, what I prepared here is a brief overview of what I believe is key to the way the Romanian funders have addressed this topic of inclusiveness and environmental issues. Now, I will start, let's say, with something that also my colleague already highlighted, is the first, for funders, it's, let's say, it's important that they should call for projects that address both issues, pro-environmental and also vulnerable populations. Now, looking at the projects that have been funded in Romania, both at the national and local level, there are many criteria defining vulnerable populations that have been invoked in these projects, such as age. We have had projects targeting the youth and also the elderly, people with disabilities, people who live in underdeveloped or communities at risk of poverty, or environments such as the rural environment, and so on. And for instance, one major funder in our community has been the local municipality, who has financed over the years a great number of projects addressing vulnerable populations in the city. And some of them also have had this environmental target, and I will try to give you some examples further on. Secondly, another recipe that has been supporting NGOs who have submitted projects addressing both issues, pro-environmental and vulnerabilities, is the inclusion in the evaluation grid of criteria bonusing or increasing the score of the projects that explicitly address vulnerable populations. And I feel the need of highlighting something more about this way of approaching the topic that we are talking about today, because the core issue here behind this bonusing of projects addressing vulnerable populations, in many cases, has been the social impact, in the sense of creating a real benefit, not only at the level of the specific group of the vulnerable population. For instance, at-risk youth, young people residing in poor families, in poor environments, or the elderly, or etc. But also to create benefits at the level of the whole community. And this is, let's say, a way of approaching the idea of providing support for a specific vulnerable population, but at the same time creating further on and more general benefits for the entire community. And this has been explicitly targeted by the local municipality, in the sense that over the years that there have been instances in which they called for projects that would create general benefits for the Iași community through their impact at a very specific level. And for instance, projects addressing youth at risk of social marginalization that aimed specifically to create environmental education in this population. Now, environmental education, we can look at it as a very specific target, making these people more aware of the impact that their behavior has on the environment, and educating in them good practices towards the environment. At the same time, there is more subtle and more general and more important at the level of the community target, that of fostering societal values, and thus preventing the risk of this social marginalization expanding and becoming radicalization or extreme poverty, extreme isolation from the rest of the community. So in this sense, we can look at environmental education and generally inducing pro-environmental behavior as a way to reconnect the individual and the vulnerable populations to the community to which they belong. And then we can, let's say, go further with this more abstract way of looking at things by identifying two types of involvement of beneficiaries. Many projects, of course, and I'm sure that you know, and my colleague before talked about this, involve beneficiaries as passive recipients of support of some way or another, social provision, economical provision, and etc. At the same time, they can be involved actively as active participants towards a common goal. And the example I gave you before with environmental education is a good instance, I think, for this, as it aims to involve vulnerable populations, not only as passive recipients from the top down of knowledge, of education, but also further involving them into changing the community towards environmental valuable goals. And this can entail many types of behavior, from the classical ecological targets, recycling, for instance, to other more general or different types of actions. So, and also at the same time, it's important, as my colleague also highlighted, to consider the fact that even vulnerable people can have two types of roles in relation to environmental issues. They can be either at-risk populations, and this is the classical instance in which NGOs, universities write projects that aim to provide support that would mitigate the negative effects of climate change or environmental degradation on their welfare, health, economic state of affairs, etc. Or they can be alternatively, they can have an active role in this relation. So first, talking about at-risk populations, some examples from the past in our community. Of course, as many other cities, Iași is also exposed to intense waves of heat during the summer, and some projects targeted the elder city residents and aim to provide them support in various forms. Also, the social aspect has been quite important in this type of project or of support, because, as you know, the elderly tend to isolate themselves even more during these periods, and such projects attempt to bring them together in a comforting environment and connect them and provide them with social support and social activities. Another example is that of countryside residents around the city. And of course, many of them in Romania have a special type of agriculture, which is called subsistence farming. They consume or they produce only for their own consumption. And this type of subsistence farming is the most vulnerable to climate change. And of course, there's a lot of space for economic support and other types of support that projects can provide, besides state support towards agriculture. Okay, so here we are talking about the at-risk populations. At the same time, as I told you, even vulnerable populations can have an active role. And in Romania, because traditionally and culturally, the relation to environment is very skewed towards an anthropogenic role, in the sense that it's the humans that dominate and use the natural resources, and this is the right way as it is perceived in the traditional ideology. There's a great room for improvement towards a different way of approaching the environment. And so here, for instance, we are talking about the wild environment and the fact that some projects aim to change the way local people who are vulnerable, especially from the socioeconomic point of view, relate to the natural resources and aggravate the problems that are already there because of climate change. And this type of support, of course, entails not only economic support, but also change of the frame of mind in which they perceive their relation to the natural habitat. Another example is that concerning eco-friendly agricultural practices instead of the cheaper, more financially affordable ways of cultivating the land. And of course, in Romania, and I suppose in other countries, the dominant way of doing this is this damaging agricultural practices. And of course, there's a great room of improving this in fostering eco-friendly practices instead. So this active role is, let's say, generally creates room for education and room for creativity in providing alternatives. Because from what I know about the projects that have been successful in this direction, it's not enough to promise that you will convince the people that what they are doing regularly, traditionally, over generations is wrong. You have to provide them with a credible and sustainable alternative. And this requires, of course, creativity and collaboration among experts from various fields. Now, a final point, and of course, we can talk more during the discussion. I would also make an observation that I think it's important, and looking at past projects that have been successful here, it's important not only to target the specific vulnerable population in itself, but also talk about and highlight the way in which your project or our project can support collective identity. And this is very likely to increase community engagement. So it's not only them, the vulnerable, that needs to be supported and helped because they are vulnerable and they need the community support. Alternatively, another frame of mind is to look at this and at the project as a tool to support the whole community, because the vulnerable population can be defined as an essential part of the community, and the community in general is exposed to serious threats posed by climate change. So it's, let's say, it might be a good approach in designing the project to highlight the benefit for the whole community, and also to find ways to present towards the community the activities in the project as a way for all the members of the community to to connect against climate change and towards mitigating its threats. And this is, of course, not applicable to all the projects. If you have a very specific target, for instance, let's help the homeless because they are exposed to, let's say, intense heats during the summer and they need practical support. it might be more difficult to coin this aim in terms of collective identity in comparison to other types of interventions. But of course, as in all attempts at project design, it requires creativity. Okay, so I thank you for now and talk to you in what follows.
Thank you very much, Professor Holman. If you can stop sharing. Yeah, good, great. Thank you very much, both of you. It was really very inspiring, very nice talks, lots of ideas.